response to what's happening in Washington today as we inaugurate a new president, and what we expect to happen in coming hours and days and weeks ahead.
You're right.
That's what we expect.
Trouble from the start.
He said he
No.
was.
You go with everything.
This is a whole. That's how I feel today. It's Monday.
It's a personal slight. We're gonna interpret it as such.
If you had like a lavalier, we'd be good.
That's how he feels about it.
You want to use my pole? I have a stand.
We got stand too, or if you want.
We're good?
Yeah.
Hey, you do it, so. Number 8, right?
Number 8. All right, so we're here to talk about the state's response, reaction, what's happening in Washington today, and the inauguration of a new president. Let me just say, we're responding in real time, so I don't know if anything happened in the 2 minutes between when I left my office and came down the elevator, but suffice it to say, it's fast moving, and we don't yet know exactly what the president has planned for today and the coming days. Let me just say, suffice it to say, I've been in constant communication with my colleagues. State attorneys general are closely, tightly coordinated. We've been tightly coordinated, obviously, all along, but particularly in the last couple of days and in the last few hours, we're in constant communication. Here's what we know. The president laid out some pretty broad statements in his remarks in his inaugural address about the border, about energy, about the economy. He made a comment about gender. We were expecting hundreds of executive orders today. I understand the president has a desk established, set up in the Capitol Rotunda, and maybe that's where he intends to sign executive orders. I don't know when he's going to do that. We have a handful of vetoes at the moment. I also want to say, I'm not sure we're going to know right away when he issues an executive order. I'm not sure they're going to tell us, and I don't think that they or the secretaries or the president of the White House are necessarily going to come out and print a list and say, here are all the executive orders for today and in the coming days. But we've just got a handful right now, and we were told there'd be upwards of 100 or 200 today. So I'm going to be here, and we're going to wait and see what happens, and we'll respond accordingly. We do expect him to act, if not today, very shortly, on birthright citizenship. And we know that they've threatened immigration actions in places like Chicago. Then we heard Tom Homan pull that back because allegedly there's a leak. So some uncertainty there, but we expect him to act on birthright by executive order, and we are ready for that as soon as he does. We also heard him talk about border, National Guard, asylum. We're concerned about all of those issues and how it impacts Connecticut, not just broadly, but how it impacts us here in Connecticut. Special education, of course, and when she's confirmed, I hope that Secretary McMahon will remember Connecticut and that she is a Connecticut native and special ed students that need her. And so we will respond as soon as anyone takes action on that issue. And of course, you heard him talk about gender. You know, he's going to talk a lot about these issues. You know, some would call them social issues. Here's what I'll say. This is about real people who live real lives, and they have jobs, they have housing. At least I hope they have jobs, and they have housing, and access to education. And if he does anything based on their gender or gender identity to impact their jobs, or their housing, or their health care, I will not hesitate to act. When I act, I will be guided by a very simple test. Does the action impact or harm people in Connecticut or Connecticut families? Number one. Number two, do we have good claims and defenses? Number three, do we have standing? If all three of those prongs are satisfied, I am likely to act. It's really important to note what he didn't say today. The president didn't say in his remarks. He didn't tell us how he's going to drive prices down. He said he's going to drill, but between that and actually impacting what it costs for a family here in Connecticut to run a household, put food on the table, keep the lights on, to educate kids, he didn't address any of that. He didn't address how he's going to protect consumers. For example, on the price of groceries, or this phenomenon that I'm very concerned about, shrinkflation, where the bag of chips looks like the same bag of chips, but there are less chips in the bag, and nobody ever told us they are reducing the amount of chips. Or the 12-pack of seltzers, that's now an 8-pack, but still costs the same as a 12-pack. So I'm very concerned about that. He didn't talk about that. He didn't talk about housing. He didn't talk about gun violence. He didn't talk about how he's going to address the youth mental health and social media addiction crisis. He obviously hasn't told us how he's going to help states and state attorneys general address the opioid and addiction crisis. What I am most worried about right now are Connecticut families. And a lot of people, I have heard from a lot of families and a lot of people in this year. And they're right in this area. And if the whole point of this, in part, is to stoke fear, they are succeeding. And what that does is it creates chaos for families. I've said a few times now, most families that include an undocumented person are of mixed status. 70% of families that have an undocumented person in that household are of mixed status. And so if you create fear around people's complicated immigration statuses, you impact those families, you impact the children who may be American-born children with birthright citizenship. You may have relatives, you have brothers and sisters, you have a spouse, and you create chaos where I'm really concerned that kids are going to be worried about going to school, or their parents are going to be worried about sending kids to school, or the parents are going to be worried about going to the school with their kids. I'm worried about people showing up at their jobs. I'm worried about small businesses, family businesses here in Connecticut being able to run their businesses if people stop showing up for work, or customers stop showing up to buy goods and services. I'm worried about healthcare. I'm worried about parents and young people deciding not to get help, to get health care if they're sick. And I'm worried about people not calling the police if they need the police. And if they're a victim, but because they have a complicated immigration status, they won't pick up the phone and call 911. And so these are real concerns for Connecticut families right now, even before these executive orders drop. And speaking of birthright citizenship, what about babies that are born? What status do they have? Are they going to have no status? Their parents' status? Are they going to be effectively stateless? And what happens to their education, health care, housing? So, attorneys general already. We're not just preparing, we're mobilizing now. Real time. We are the ones actually addressing prices, housing, the youth mental health crisis, the opioid and addiction crisis, gun violence. We've been here many times talking about all the actions that my colleagues and I are taking. We're going to stay on offense on all these issues. We're going to continue to be affirmative, and we're going to react real time and immediately to whatever the president does that may adversely impact them.
What standing would the state of Connecticut have regarding a challenge to whatever President Trump does regarding birthright citizenship?
Well, it'll impact families and kids here in Connecticut, and acting on behalf of those families.
That is sufficient?
I believe that it is.
And
And it impacts, goes far beyond those families. It impacts the services that we provide to those families. It impacts how we depend on those families. Remember, as I've said a few times now, America runs on Dunkin' and immigrant workers, including Kentucky. Okay, and if you want to blow up Connecticut's economy, let's support 100,000 people tomorrow, and that'll do great damage to our.
when it comes to transgender persons, the state of Connecticut does have a law that Would a federal executive order basically erasing transgender status in the federal system, how would that give you or other AGs cause to sue, to challenge such an executive order?
So if it impacts broadly a class of people here in Connecticut, first of all, I don't believe broadly that the federal government has the right to erase protections that the state of Connecticut has put in place for people in our state. We're a sovereign state of Connecticut. We have the right to pass laws, anti-discrimination laws. The federal government, in general terms, is a floor, not a ceiling. And if the federal government is unwilling to protect members of the LGBTQ plus community, we will. And I will not hesitate to bring an action to vindicate those rights. But if the federal government takes an action that broadly discriminates against people here in Connecticut, we will have standing to challenge them.
When you talk about you and other AGs taking action against some of these executive orders, what does that look like?
So it takes a lot of different forms, but suffice it to say, it can include a lawsuit, and it can include seeking of not just immediate relief or injunctive relief, but also damages and compensation and reimbursement for the costs that states incur. And so what it means is that attorneys general and our staffs are talking real time about these issues. We have thought about and prepared for all the different ways that we think they're going to come at these issues. I can't say that we've covered it all because, you know, the group in Washington's a pretty unpredictable bunch. And so they may come up with some creative new tack that we haven't anticipated. We're ready for that.
Do you have any avenues to stop, we're hearing all these reports about stepped up immigration enforcement in major cities. We have not heard any Connecticut cities mention it yet, but what tools are available to you and to the state to stop or assist those that are the target of those raids?
So let me say first of all, the design of our federal system is that the federal government has broad authority over immigration. And that was true when President Obama and President Biden were president, and it's true now. And so the truth is that ICE has broad authority and broad powers. In general terms, though, they have to follow the law, and they have to honor the due process rights of people. And they can't do whatever the heck they want and go wherever the heck they want to go. They have to honor the law, they have to honor public safety, and they can't commandeer state and local law enforcement to do their job for them. That's their job. Our job is to keep Connecticut communities safe. Our job is to keep your hometown of Trumbull safe, Stamford, Hartford. Our job is to focus on the people that live here. And ICE should focus on its responsibilities and not ask us to do their job for them. To the extent that they violate that federal-state relationship, again, I don't want to shadow box, but depending on the facts of how they do that, I may be able to take action. The truth is, I can't represent, as a general principle, individuals. I represent one client, the state of Connecticut, and all of its constituent parts. So I can't represent individuals, but I am trying to help and support efforts by pro bono organizations and non-governmental organizations to support people in the community. And when appropriate and when my voice will help, I will speak, and I will speak loudly and forcefully to try to help people that are impacted by what I believe will be at times an unlawful violation of our sovereignty as a state, number one, and also just an unfair and unjust persecution of people who are just here, like my folks, trying to make a living and do better for themselves and their kids.
So with this algorithm, you don't have a specific cause of action that you anticipate requiring a specific executive order.
Not at this moment.
They are, at the rally, at Capitol Arena, I believe it is, they do have a desk set up.
Yeah.
Where every year it's planning to some.
Sorry, so the arena, not at the rotunda.
Right. Well, they did do some stuff with it. Anyway, so, will you be updating anything tonight if there's something that specific, or is that unlikely for you to know something specifically that if X order is signed, we will do action Y?
Yeah, I expect that if X order is signed and it's on a subject that we have standing to respond to, that I will do that and we will let you know. And I think we'll do that in real time.
As far as
As
you,
much as, I mean, as quickly as we can.
as far as you know, is Mark Silverman still active U.S. attorney?
As far as I know.
What kind of staff did you have turning out today in this state holiday?
So my core executive staff are here, and then others are working and at the ready.
Here, how many people in the office now? You got somebody scraping the internet for?
I'm here.
videos?
I'm here, and the Solicitor General is here, but he's wearing jeans.
Where do they stand right now with state law trump if there's a national emergency for the
So again, I use the term shadow boxing. It is hard to know at this moment what powers he's going to invoke and in what manner. So when Paz asked about standing, let me also say that I think there's been some criticism about how this administration handled itself in its previous incarnation in 1.0. But suffice it to say, there's some smart people there. Okay? And they're going to think about how they assert their powers. I'll give you a good example. Tom Homan is not going before the United States Senate for confirmation. There's a reason for that. Okay, so they're going to avoid problems if they can avoid them. So we'll have to see how they do it, right? And so, do they invoke? He cited the Alien Entities Act, like a very arcane law that's over 100 years old. You know, he's obviously cited the Insurrection Act many times. How are they going to do it? Which federal title will they use? We don't know.
And the same thing goes with birthright citizenship. Do you have any idea in terms of the scope of what Trump is going to target in terms of, like, for example, is he targeting children with undocumented parents specifically, or
Yeah.
all of their parents?
Good question, don't know. You know, frankly, my feeling is an attack on some part of that community is an attack on all of us. Because, by the way, like, some family, even if they have legal status, like my folks did 52 years ago now, they're not lawyers. They're not immigration lawyers. I'm not an immigration lawyer. Okay? And so if you ask me right now to provide legal advice to somebody on immigration, I probably would hesitate to do that because that's not what I do every single day. That's not my area of law. And so to expect regular lay people, immigrants, and I'll take it a step further, people who are recent immigrants and maybe for whom English is not their first language and the American constitutional system is not something they intuit like the back of their hand. They're not going to know the difference. You know, between which group of birthright citizenship is okay and which group is not, or which group of undocumented people is okay and which group is not. And that's why this breeds such chaos. Because people are going to make decisions based on incomplete, imperfect information.
If, under Connecticut's Trust Act, and this is where Connecticut is accused of being a sanctuary state.
Yeah, which is not.
Yeah, and then we go.
Yeah.
But have you identified any areas in which your office may involve itself in defending Connecticut's law? And I'm thinking
would say, sorry to give you a lawyer's answer, it depends. It depends on what the nature of the issue is and what the challenge is. I'm gonna do my job, if that's the question. I'm gonna defend Connecticut's law, the Trust Act, or any other law that's implicated by the federal government, or by a lawsuit, or by somebody violating that law. And I'm gonna do my job as I always do, and defend Connecticut statutes. Let me be clear about how we should regard the Trust Act. The Trust Act is not controversial. Okay? There is this suggestion that the Trust Act represents some defiance of federal law, or that it is contrary to federal law. Not true. Okay? The Trust Act stands for the not controversial proposition that we are a federal system of 50 sovereign states, and that we get to pass laws about how we want to live, and we delegate limited powers to the federal government, including immigration, and that the federal government is charged as the primary governmental entity responsible for immigration. And that's not our job, that's their job. And so the Trust Act says, you do your job, we'll do our job. You can't use our resources to do your job. It also is called the Trust Act, as you know, because we want to maintain trust and faith with local communities, so that if somebody, irrespective of their immigration status, if they're assaulted, if their car is broken into, if they're a victim of domestic violence, they can pick up the phone and call 911. And they won't be afraid to do that. They trust that their police will respond and protect them like anyone else. And so this is at its root not a controversial proposition. It does not violate any federal law or principle. It's consistent with the federal system. And final thing I'll say is, look, if somebody does something wrong, if they commit a crime, if they commit a violent crime, particularly an arrogant felony, they should be investigated, prosecuted, incarcerated, and if appropriate, deported. Period. The Trust Act does not shield violent criminals. And ICE has a ton of tools at their disposal to go after violent criminals. Do your job, ICE. Issue a warrant. Get a warrant from a judge. Okay? They have abundant resources here in Connecticut. ICE is not strapped for resources and people. So put your people out there. Use your investigatory powers and capabilities. And if they do that, they'll be able to catch the bad guys, as they always have.
The regional office recently issued an unusual statement where they criticized and give us the not honoring the plaintiff on somebody who's getting released after doing time for sexual assault. Apparently, as far as we can find out, it was a Steve felony, so the Trust Act didn't want it. But anyway, Representative Stassberg, the co-chair of Judiciary, said that the Trust Act imposes requirement on ICE to get a warrant in order from the administrative judge, and that his view that it's not an onerous requirement. So, what is your take on that? How hard is it for ICE to get that? And we're not talking about what you quite ably just described about where the Trust Act gets its name. You don't want people who are victims of crime to be afraid to call the police. But in this instant of somebody being released who has done time and now faces
That guy who sexually assaulted a minor should be in jail. Okay? And guys like that should be prosecuted, incarcerated, and if appropriate, deported. I have no time or sympathy for people like that. But we can't have a system in which ICE does not honor due process. Okay, I don't think we're talking about that. I think we're talking about throwing due process out the window. So ICE should do its job. Go get a warrant. Stay on top of that guy. They knew where he was. They knew what he had been accused of. take action and make sure that you've got it covered. And by the way, there are myriad ways also in which working with our federal immigration law enforcement authorities, we can make sure that these most dangerous and violent offenders are held accountable. It's not a bar to cooperation, particularly around violent offenders. But there's this talking point that because we care about immigrants and immigrant families, because we know that we can't run a state and an economy without them, that somehow we're flouting federal law. It's just not true.